myopically focused on its war in Ukraine, the former regional hegemon has effectively left the Caucasus unattended, creating somewhat of a regional power vacuum. This has presented a real opportunity for Turkey, which, as a part of its grand plan to become a regional energy hub, has been eyeing up the Caucasus for a while now. And with Moscow distracted, Ankara has looked to step up into this emerging power vacuum. But this geopolitical shift hasn't happened overnight. Russian influence in the Caucasus has been waning for some time now, while Turkish interest in the region has been steadily growing. So, in this video, we're going to explain why Russia lost its grip on the Caucasus, how Turkey has established itself as a key player, and if there are any other challenges vying for control in the Caucasus.
Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos.
Now, before we get into the most recent developments, let's first learn a bit about why the Caucasus and why Russia and Turkey consider them to be so strategically important. The region has for centuries been critical as a conduit for trade routes between the East and the West. During the Soviet era, Moscow was in complete control of the region, which acted as a major trade artery between the Soviet Union and countries like Iran and India. However, since the fall of the Soviet Union, Russia hasn't been able to maintain the same level of influence. Now, this is mainly because many of the South Caucasus states have had quite tense relations with Russia, and Moscow has struggled to balance their competing interests. Russia has had poor relations with Georgia ever since the 2008 war, which was a consequence of both the fact that the two countries never properly delineated their borders after the USSR's collapse, and the fact that Putin was unable to prevent Georgia's tilt towards NATO and the EU. Similarly, Russia's relation with Armenia and Azerbaijan have deteriorated recently thanks to the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. Now, for context, after the Soviet Union's collapse, Armenia seized this region of Nagorno-Karabakh, which was mostly populated by ethnic Armenians. After declaring independence, a full-scale war broke out between Armenia and Azerbaijan, but no resolution was reached, and the frozen conflict endured for decades. To maintain its influence in the region and avoid upsetting either country, Russia originally tried to play both sides, presenting itself as a protector of Armenia while selling weapons to Azerbaijan and intervening whenever things got a bit too heated. But this strategy was always unsustainable, not least because Azerbaijan thought Russia was favoring Armenia over a piece of land that is internationally recognized as part of Azerbaijan. This is why, beginning in the late 2000s, Azerbaijan began trying to reduce its dependence on Russia, such as developing its own independent oil revenues and making big profits supplying the European market with gas. Azerbaijan then used its newfound oil wealth to develop its military. Now, Turkey played an indirect but decisive role in this process, training Azerbaijan's military for years and supplying Azerbaijan with drones and other equipment. Once Russia was preoccupied with Ukraine, Azerbaijan retook Nagorno-Karabakh by force, and Russia was unable to intervene. This was largely because most of the troops at Russia's Gyurmy military base in Armenia, previously Russia's largest foreign base and home to 3,000 troops, had been sent to Ukraine. Anyway, Armenia was understandably disappointed by Russia's inaction here, and responded by turning towards the EU and specifically France. So you get the idea. Russia's relations with the Caucasus states have deteriorated, largely because Moscow tried to play both sides on the Nagorno-Karabakh question, and ended up pleasing neither. And with Russian influence waning, Turkey has stepped in to fill the void, developing strong relations with not just Azerbaijan, but also Georgia, increasing bilateral trade and advocating for Georgian accession into NATO. But what does Turkey have to gain in the Caucasus? Well, there's an economic rationale here. Turkey wants to become a sort of regional energy hub, acting as a transit state for hydrocarbon exports from places like Azerbaijan to consumer markets in Europe. The Zengezur corridor, the strip of land along the Armenia-Iran border, connecting Azerbaijan to its Nakhchivan exclave, is pretty key here. Before Azerbaijan's conquest of the Nagorno-Karabakh, the Zengezur corridor was under de facto Armenian control, which meant trade between Azerbaijan and Turkey had to run through Iran, which was obviously suboptimal from Ankara's perspective. Transit fees were volatile, and truck drivers were often harassed while driving through the route. Since Azerbaijan's conquest last September, Turkey and Azerbaijan have been pressuring Armenia to allow unrestricted access to the corridor, and it looks like it's working. This would also help with Turkey's grand plan to develop the so-called Middle Corridor trade route, which would run all the way from China into Europe and provide an alternative route to Russia's Northern Corridor. The The plan seems to be going well for Turkey, as in 2022, the Middle Corridor doubled its cargo, whilst Russia's Northern Corridor saw a 34% decline in its shipping volume. These international trade flows are good for Turkey, especially because they provide a valuable source of foreign currency to stem the lira's ongoing decline. As well as economic motives, there's also a soft power element here. In the past couple of years, Erdogan has started pitching himself as the leader of what he describes as the Turkic world, which describes basically all those countries that speak some sort of Turkic language. The main vehicle for this is the Turkish-led Organization of Turkic States, which includes Turkey, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan. Developing better relations in the Caucasus, especially with Azerbaijan, is another way for Turkey to foster a sense of Turkic unity and establish Erdogan as the de facto leader of the Turkic world. However, Turkey's rising power is not unchallenged. Iran has been looking to fill the power vacuum too, whilst also deepening its relations with both Russia and Armenia. Accordingly, Iran has been actively resisting further development of the Zangezur corridor, which risks cutting Iran from vital trade routes to Russia and upsetting Armenia by staging military drills near its border with Azerbaijan and pushing Russia to take a more central role in improving regional infrastructure. It's also possible that once the war in Ukraine ends, if it ever does, Russia might refocus its attention towards the Caucasus, especially given that Russia is running out of allies elsewhere. Ultimately, whether Turkey will be successful in claiming a monopoly on the